On Boxing Day 1900, a relief ship arrived at a lighthouse on a tiny Scottish island 20 miles off the coast of Lewis. The horn sounded. A rocket was fired. No one answered. The relief keeper climbed the stone steps alone. He found the entrance gate unlocked, the door to the lighthouse ajar. Inside, the clock had stopped. A chair lay overturned on the floor. A meal sat cold and untouched on the table. 2 sets of oilskin coats were missing from their hooks, but the third set was still hanging there. 3 men had been stationed on this island, and all 3 were gone. No note, no distress signal, no bodies, just the wind, the waves, and an empty lighthouse still smelling of cold oil. This is the Flannan Isles, and what happened here has never been explained. The Flannan Isles are a cluster of 7 uninhabited islands in the Outer Hebrides, 17 miles west of the Isle of Lewis. The largest island is called Eilean Mor, Big Island, though it measures barely 500 feet across. For centuries, local fishermen refused to stay on the islands after dark. They believed the Flannans were haunted. Home to spirits they called the others. In the language of the Hebrides, the islands had another name. Nach Eileanan Flannach, the Green Islands. But nothing about them felt welcoming. The cliffs rose vertically from the North Atlantic. The winds could reach hurricane force, and the sea around these rocks was among the most violent in the British Isles. In 1895, the Northern Lighthouse Board decided to build a lighthouse on Eilean Mor. It took 4 years to complete. The light was first lit on December 7th, 1899, 1 year and 8 days before the keepers vanished. 3 men were assigned to the Flannan Isles Light. James Ducat, the principal keeper, was 43 years old with over 20 years of experience in the Northern Lighthouse Board. He was known as a calm and steady man. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, was 28 and had recently been promoted. He was careful, conscientious, and kept a meticulous log. Donald McArthur was an occasional keeper, a substitute filling in for William Ross, the first assistant, who was on sick leave. McArthur was different from the other 2. He was known on Lewis as a difficult man, a brawler, a man with a violent temper. The 3 men were left alone on Eilean Mor on December 7th, 1900, for what was supposed to be a routine 2-week shift. It would be the last time anyone saw them alive. On the night of December 15th, 1900, the steamer Arctur was sailing from Philadelphia to Leith. As it passed the Flannan Isles, the captain noted in his log that the lighthouse was dark. No light was visible. In rough weather, with dangerous rocks all around, the lighthouse should have been burning bright. The captain reported the failure when he reached port. But his report got lost in the bureaucracy. The Northern Lighthouse Board was not immediately informed. For 11 days, the Flannan Isles lighthouse stood dark on its cliff. No one on the mainland knew why. No one went to check. On December 26th, the relief vessel Hesperus finally arrived. Captain James Harvey had been trying to reach the island for days, but the weather had been too severe. When the ship anchored off the east landing, they flew the flag and sounded the horn. No reply. They fired a rocket. No reply. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was lowered into a small boat and rowed to shore alone. He climbed the steep path cut into the cliff face and reached the compound gate. It was closed, but not locked. The door to the lighthouse was ajar. Moore pushed it open and stepped inside. The kitchen was empty. An overturned chair lay on the floor. A meal sat uneaten on the table. Cold meat, pickled onions, and potatoes. The fire in the grate had burned down to nothing. The clock on the wall had stopped. Moore searched the bedrooms. Empty. He checked the light room at the top of the tower. The lamp was cleaned, trimmed, and ready to be lit. But it had not been lit. He ran back to the landing and shouted to the Hesperus, "The keepers are gone." Captain Harvey immediately sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The three keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. 3 days later, Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived to conduct the official investigation. Muirhead had personally recruited all 3 men. He knew them well. What he found on the west side of the island shook him. The west landing platform, a massive stone structure 70 feet above the water, had been torn apart. Iron railings were bent and twisted. A crane for lifting supplies had been ripped from its foundation. A life buoy that had been strapped to the railing was gone. A heavy stone block, estimated at over a ton, had been displaced from its position, and a rope box, which the keepers used to store mooring lines, had been ripped from a crevice 110 feet above sea level. Muirhead wrote in his report that the damage was difficult to believe unless actually seen. But the most troubling piece of evidence was found inside the lighthouse. 2 sets of oilskin coats and boots were missing from the hooks by the door, those belonging to Ducat and Marshall. This meant 2 men had dressed for the storm before going outside, but the third set, McArthur's, was still hanging on its hook. His boots were by the door. If McArthur had gone outside, he had gone in just his shirt sleeves, into a North Atlantic storm, in December, on an island with cliffs dropping hundreds of feet into churning water. No experienced keeper would go out in a December gale without his waterproofs, unless he had no time to put them on, unless something happened so suddenly, so urgently, that he ran out the door without stopping. Thomas Marshall's log entries were examined closely. Everything appeared normal up through December 13th, but then the entries took an unusual turn. On December 12th, Marshall noted severe winds, force 9 on the Beaufort scale. He wrote that James Ducat had been very quiet. On December 13th, the storm intensified. Marshall recorded that Donald McArthur had been crying. He wrote, "God is over all." The final entry was recorded on the morning of December 15th. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. After that, nothing. 3 men. A stopped clock. An uneaten meal. And a final entry that read like a prayer. What happened after Marshall wrote those words is the question that has haunted Scotland for over a century. Superintendent Muirhead's report concluded that all 3 men had gone to the west landing platform to secure equipment during a severe storm. An extraordinarily large wave, what sailors call a rogue wave, had swept up the cliff face and carried them into the sea. It was, the board ruled, a tragic accident, death by misadventure. But the conclusion raised more questions than it answered. Why would McArthur leave without his oilskins? Lighthouse protocol strictly required that at least 1 keeper remain inside the lighthouse at all times. Why would all 3 abandon the light? And if the storm had ended on the morning of December 15th, as Marshall's log stated, why were they out on the cliffs at all? Over the decades, dozens of theories emerged. Some believed McArthur, known for his violent temper, had attacked the other 2 in a fit of rage, and then thrown himself from the cliffs. A murder and a suicide. Others suggested the men had been driven mad by isolation and the relentless storms. Lighthouse keepers of that era were known to suffer from what was called rock madness, a psychological collapse brought on by confinement, darkness, and the endless sound of wind and waves. More exotic theories proposed abduction by foreign spies, or that the men had staged their own deaths and escaped to start new lives. And then there were the old stories, the ones the fishermen of Lewis had told for generations. That the Flannan Isles were cursed, that the spirits of the islands, the others, took the men in the night. No theory has ever been proven. No bodies were ever found. But those who know the North Atlantic understood something that armchair investigators did not. The sea around the Flannan Isles is capable of things that seem impossible. Waves have been documented reaching heights of over 100 feet in the deep waters west of Scotland. When these waves hit a cliff face, the water doesn't just crash, it erupts. It surges upward with the force of a freight train, reaching heights far above the normal waterline. A phenomenon called green water, a solid wall of ocean, not spray, not foam, but dense, crushing water, can appear with almost no warning. It can reach elevations of 100 feet or more. The damage Muirhead found at the West Landing, the twisted iron, the displaced boulders, the ripped crane, was consistent with a wave of extraordinary power. Perhaps Ducat and Marshall went to secure the ropes. Perhaps McArthur saw them from the lighthouse window, saw the wave coming, and ran to warn them, without stopping for his coat, without thinking about protocol. And perhaps the sea took all three of them in a single catastrophic moment. On February 5, 1901, new keepers were posted to the Flannan Isles lighthouse. They found the island exactly as Moore had left it, windswept, isolated, and empty. The lighthouse continued to operate with human keepers until 1971, when it was fully automated. No one lives on Elian Moor today. The lighthouse still stands. Its light still turns. But it turns alone. 3 men walked into a storm on a December night in 1900. The sea gave nothing back. No wreckage, no clothing, no remains. Just the wind across the cliffs and a light that burned on without them. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald McArthur. Gone. And the Flannan Isles keep their secret still.